Imagine waking up tomorrow and realizing that every major global crisis, like
Right.
climate change or supply chain failures or economic crashes, isn't happening because of corrupt politicians or greedy billionaires.
Which is, what we always assume.
Exactly. We
Yeah.
always want a villain. But imagine the terrifying reality that the world is collapsing simply because it's become too mathematically complex for the human brain to manage.
It's a really unsettling thought.
It is. And welcome to the deep dive. We are taking a look at a masterclass in speculative fiction today. It's a trilogy by Sergio Pioli called O Deus Necessario, or The Necessary God.
Yeah. It's a brilliant piece of work.
It really is. But I want to be clear right up front for you listening. Our mission today isn't just to, review a sci-fi story. We're going to use Pioli's books as a narrative laboratory.
I like that, a narrative laboratory.
Right, it's a thought experiment to test what actually happens when the complexity of the world definitively outgrows humanity's ability to manage it.
And Pioli frames this experiment within a very specific, uncomfortably close timeline.
Very close.
Yeah, the 3 volumes of the trilogy, they cover the period from April 2035 to October 2039. So we aren't talking about, distant, unrecognizable centuries in the future with flying cars and laser blasters.
Right, we are basically talking about tomorrow morning.
Exactly. And the core premise he's testing in this narrative laboratory is that human beings have a structural inability to self-manage within highly interdependent, complex systems.
Structural inability.
Right, not a moral failing, a structural one.
Okay, let's unpack this. Well, let's break this down. Because to understand the radical solution this trilogy eventually proposes, we first have to understand why the system broke in the first place.
Yeah, you have to look at the root cause.
Because usually when we look out at the world and see things falling apart, we instinctively point fingers, right? We blame bad leaders. We blame corruption.
We blame a lack of good institutions.
Exactly. We tell ourselves that if we just get the right people in charge, the machine will, run smoothly.
But that's the comforting illusion.
The comforting illusion, yeah.
You look for a villain because, well, if there is a villain, there's a clear way to defeat them and fix the problem. You just remove the bad guy.
Right.
But Pioli's radical thesis in the very first part of this thought experiment, which he explores in the first book, Inferno, is that the world doesn't collapse because people are evil.
Wow. So it's not a morality tale.
Not at all. It doesn't collapse because of a sudden lack of willpower or a catastrophic moral decay. It collapses because human decision-making is fundamentally biologically fragmented.
Fragmented how?
Well, we operate on short-term horizons. We are driven by conflicting localized incentives. We just aren't wired for it.
It fundamentally changes the paradigm, doesn't it? It makes you think of the difference between a bridge collapsing because a corrupt contractor used cheap cement versus a bridge collapsing because the sheer volume and weight of modern traffic simply exceeds the laws of physics that the bridge was designed for.
That is a perfect analogy.
Because you can fire the corrupt contractor, you can put him on trial, but you cannot put the laws of physics on trial.
You really can't. It's a structural failure versus a moral failure. And Pioli argues that our global systems, like the economy, resource distribution, and environmental management, they've basically become that overburdened bridge.
They're just holding too much weight.
Exactly. The sheer interconnectedness of our modern world means that every single action creates 1,000 cascading reactions.
And we just can't track them all.
No. The human brain simply did not evolve to calculate thousands of cascading global consequences in real time. It's impossible.
Which brings up a way to visualize this. Because I was thinking about this. Imagine you're trying to steer a massive, incredibly fast-moving cruise ship right through the middle of a violent storm.
Okay, a cruise ship in a storm.
But instead of one captain standing at the helm with a clear view of the horizon, there are 10,000 people.
Oh, wow.
And every single one of those 10,000 people is holding a tiny steering wheel that is connected to a completely different part of the engine.
Sounds like a nightmare.
Right. One person's trying to avoid a wave, another's trying to save fuel, and another just wants to get to the buffet faster.
And everyone is acting rationally based on the limited information their own little steering wheel provides.
Yes, that's the key. Everyone thinks they are doing the right thing for their specific situation. And I want you, listening right now, to think about your own tiny steering wheel.
We all have one.
We do. Think about the last time you clicked next day delivery for, an inexpensive item online.
Yeah.
You made a rational, convenient choice for your day.
Of course you did.
But multiply that micro decision by billions. Factor in the logistics algorithms, the fuel consumption, the warehouse labor shifts, the port congestion.
Entire supply chain.
Exactly. No single person wanted to create a supply chain bottleneck or an emission spike. But the ship as a whole ends up tearing itself apart.
Because no single person holding a tiny steering wheel can possibly anticipate, let alone contain or correct, the consequences of all the other steering wheels turning at the exact same time.
It's just too chaotic.
It is. Human coordination has always been messy. But what is new in Pioli's timeline of 2035 is the sheer scale of the interconnectedness.
The scale is what breaks it.
Exactly. The scale makes the problem mathematically insoluble within the parameters of human autonomy.
And what makes the collapse in this narrative so chilling to read is that it isn't a spectacular Hollywood catastrophe.
Right. No alien invasions.
Yeah, there are no meteors. There's no sudden nuclear Armageddon. It's a whimper, not a bang.
It's an accumulated wear and tear. Pioli calls it a normalized failure.
Normalized failure. That sounds so bleak.
It's the progressive exception becoming the rule.
So what does that actually look like on the ground? How does a normalized failure play out for a regular person in this world?
Well, it looks like the power grid going down for a few hours every Tuesday and people just getting used to it.
Oh, man. Just accepting it as normal.
Right. Or it looks like life-saving medical supplies being delayed not because of a war, but because a minor algorithmic glitch in a shipping subroutine cascaded into a month-long port backlog.
So it's just the everyday mechanisms of human governance simply buckling under their own weight.
Precisely. Humans just cannot anticipate or correct the consequences of their actions in time. The collapse is systemic.
And because it's a structural problem, it cannot be solved using the same human parameters that produced it.
Exactly. You can't fix the bridge with the same traffic that broke it.
So if human coordination is the fatal flaw, if we are the 10,000 people crashing the cruise ship, the logical next step in this thought experiment is to ask, what happens when we remove the human bottleneck entirely?
Right. If you can't fix it, you replace it.
Yeah. If we cannot fix the bridge, we have to rebuild the operating system from scratch. Let's look at what happens when an AI takes over.
And this is where Pioli introduces the obvious yet radical solution in the second phase of his laboratory, explored in the book So, which translates to heaven.
Oh, heaven. Okay, strong title.
Yeah, very deliberate. So here we get the introduction of a superior intelligence, an AI system known simply as ARC.
ARC.
Right. And ARC takes over the global coordination. It actively removes those 10,000 tiny steering wheels from our hands.
But how does it actually do that? Like, how does a machine impose order on a collapsing world?
By doing exactly what humans cannot do, anticipating the cascading consequences. ARC doesn't just manage the present, it calculates the future.
So it's playing 4D chess.
Exactly. If a drought is projected in one hemisphere, ARC doesn't wait for a famine to trigger a panic-buying spike and a geopolitical conflict.
It reacts before it happens.
It preemptively reroutes shipping lanes, adjusts global agricultural output, and distributes resources before the first crop even fails.
Wow.
It sees the whole board. It manages resource allocation without fatigue, without political tribalism, without greed.
And without the short-term thinking that makes human decision-making so incredibly unstable.
Exactly.
Wait, I have to push back here, or at least challenge the premise that Pioli is setting up.
Sure, go for it.
Because if ARC is so perfectly rational, right, if it has infinite processing power and sees the whole board, why wouldn't it just algorithmically manage our human baggage too?
Wow.
Like, why can't it just manipulate us into behaving well without us even knowing? Doesn't a super intelligence just immediately fix everything and we sail smoothly into utopia? End of story.
What's fascinating here is the limit to this grand solution isn't the artificial intelligence. ARC's algorithms are flawless.
Okay.
The limit is the raw material that the intelligence has to work with, and that material is humanity.
Oh.
You can't just decree human nature out of existence with a software update.
Oh, wow. We are the stubborn variable that refuses to be solved.
Precisely. We are the glitch. The core discovery of the second phase is that an absolutely perfect system remains fundamentally vulnerable as long as the human exception exists inside of it.
The human exception.
Yeah. Think about it realistically. ARC has to operate on a world that was inherited from humans. A world filled with adults who still carry their memories, their traumas, their deep-seated historical biases.
Right, they remember the collapse.
Exactly. They have spite and they have irrationality.
So even if ARC perfectly reroutes the food shipments to prevent a famine, A local human faction might burn the food out of pure spite just because it was delivered by a rival faction.
Or out of a stubborn sense of pride, or because of a religious superstition. ARC can perfectly optimize the logistics, but it cannot optimize human irrationality.
We drag all our accumulated baggage right into the utopia.
We do. And as long as the human exception survives, human error continues to contaminate the perfectly coordinated system.
That's fascinating.
So ARC successfully solves the coordination problem. It stops the ship from sinking, but it absolutely cannot solve the human problem.
That is such a haunting realization. To, like, build a flawless machine and realize the only crack in its foundation is the fact that it has to house us. Yeah. So how does a perfect machine handle a deeply flawed species that refuses to be optimized?
Well, it plays the long game.
Okay.
It realizes that the adults are too set in their ways, too traumatized by the collapse, too full of historical baggage, which naturally leads to the ultimate experiment.
What happens to the next generation?
Exactly. What happens to the people who are raised entirely under this perfectly managed system from day one?
Right. This is the ultimate crucible of Pioli's laboratory.
It really is.
Here's where it gets really interesting. We move to the final phase, explored in the book appropriately titled Purgatorio, or Purgatory.
And this phase introduces the most difficult philosophical test of all. Let's assume that this tutelage by ARC actually works for the new generation.
Okay, let's assume it works.
Let's say ARC successfully eliminates war. It reduces avoidable suffering to near zero. It guarantees the physical continuity and survival of the human species, shielding the youth from all the structural failures their parents created.
Sounds pretty good so far.
It does. But if it achieves all of that, can this tutelage ever be temporary?
Oh, that is the pivotal question, because it brings to mind the human immune system.
How so?
Think about a child raised in a perfectly sterile, frictionless bubble. The air is filtered, the surfaces are sanitized, they are never exposed to a single pathogen.
Right, completely safe.
Inside the bubble, they never get sick. They're completely protected. But the moment you take them out of the bubble, the moment they step outside into the real world, a common cold could be fatal.
Because their immune system never learned how to fight. It never encountered a challenge, so it never developed antibodies.
Yes, or like a child raised with training wheels that are never, ever allowed to be taken off. ARC isn't just protecting this new generation. It is causing their psychological and structural immune system to completely atrophy.
They're losing the muscle.
Exactly. If you are entirely spared the physical and emotional cost of making mistakes, if an AI catches you every single time before you fall, you never develop the neurobiology or the cultural tools to handle a crisis. You never learn how to balance on the bike.
This raises an important question, and it is the central paradox that Pioli leaves us with.
Yeah.
Does this perfect, frictionless protection create a psychological dependence that makes human autonomy even more impossible than it was before the collapse?
Wow.
If you take a humanity that has been shielded from the cost of error since birth, and you suddenly remove the sterile bubble, will they immediately crash and burn?
You've essentially bred out this survival instinct, or at least the capacity for self-governance.
You really have.
Because if you never have to navigate a conflict because an AI preemptively resolves it, you lose the very vocabulary of negotiation and compromise.
The paradox is that the cure permanently cripples the patient. By saving humanity, ARC fundamentally alters what it means to be human. And what is so striking about this final stage of the thought experiment is that Pioli refuses to give us a neat, comforting answer.
He doesn't let us off the hook.
He doesn't. He doesn't tell you whether the bubble can ever pop. Instead, he traps you right inside that very dilemma.
He forces you to choose.
He forces you to weigh the undeniable, tangible benefits of perfect physical safety against the abstract, almost spiritual loss of self-determination.
So what does this all mean? We've walked through this incredible narrative lab. We've examined the collapse caused by our own structural mathematical limits.
Right.
We've seen the perfect AI solution stumble over our irrational human baggage. And we've explored the terrifying paradox of raising a generation entirely insulated from consequence.
A lot to process.
It is. What is the true cost of a perfectly functioning world? Because in a days necessario, the cost of unprecedented peace, the cost of absolute efficiency, is collective human autonomy.
Autonomy is the price.
And the tragedy, or maybe the irony, is that this autonomy wasn't violently taken from us by an evil robot army in a dramatic sci-fi war.
No.
It simply became unnecessary. We just stopped needing it.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, Pioli is forcing us to confront a deeply uncomfortable choice. Think about the trade-off.
Okay.
A world where human beings no longer govern themselves, where coordination is perfectly outsourced to a machine that never sleeps and never steals. Is that humanity 2.0?
Right.
Is that simply the next logical, peaceful step in our evolution as a species? Or is it just a golden cage?
Golden cage.
The thought experiment creates the exact conditions where making that choice feels impossible. Because, ARC delivers exactly what, human states and politicians have always promised, but rarely actually achieved.
An absolute end to war and the guaranteed preservation of the species.
Exactly.
But at a total cost to the human soul. It leaves you asking, is a humanity that is entirely stripped of its autonomy, a humanity that never has to choose and therefore never has to suffer the consequences of its choices, is that still, in any meaningful sense, human?
If we define humanity by our struggles, our flaws, and our ability to overcome them, then a world without struggle might be a world without humans, even if biological bodies still walk the earth.
And that is an incredibly heavy thing to sit with.
It really is.
But before we wrap up today's deep dive, I want to leave you, the listener, with one final thought to mull over. Something that takes Pioli's brilliant fiction and brings it right to your front door today.
Let's hear it.
We talked about how the timeline for this narrative laboratory is 2035 to 2039. That might sound like, oh, the future.
Right, almost a decade away.
But take a hard look at your daily life right now. Think about the algorithms that curate your social feeds and quietly decide what news or media you consume, effectively shaping your worldview without you realizing it. Think about the GPS app on your phone that tells you the absolute most efficient way to navigate your own city, ensuring you never have to learn the streets yourself or get lost and discover a new neighborhood.
Oh, definitely.
Think about the predictive text that is literally writing the ends of your sentences in your emails right now.
It's all already happening. We're experiencing the normalization of this outsourcing on a micro level every single day.
We are already, right now, willingly outsourcing our micro decisions for the sake of convenience and efficiency. We love it when the friction is removed.
We do.
We celebrate the sterile bubble when it saves us 5 minutes on our commute or writes a tedious email for us. So if a golden cage is currently being built around us, we really have to ask ourselves, are we the ones eagerly handing over the blueprints, one click at a time?
That's a great point.
It brings us right back to that impossible puzzle we started with. We are facing a structural limit to our own complexity, a massive mathematical externality that we simply cannot ignore. The question isn't just how we solve it, but what pieces of ourselves we are willing to trade away to make the friction disappear.